Okay, so in this repair video, we're going to be working on a package that came by mail. This is coming from Winter Haven, Florida, and it's an iMac motherboard. The motherboard came in for EFI password removal. This is the 820-3588. So this is the 2013 21-inch. The BIOS chip should be located over here. Now, I do see some flux on one area of the board. I do not know what that is about. Look at this. This looks like an ISL chip. We're not going to worry about this because that's not why the board was sent here. We are working on a whole different side of the board. So what we're going to do is we're going to desolder the BIOS chip. We're going to program it with a new firmware that doesn't have a password. We're going to solder the chip back on and everything should be good. So let's go ahead and remove the chip and see how that is done. One thing we have to make note of is pin number 1 is on the bottom left of the chip based on the orientation that I have the motherboard on the bench right now. Let me turn on the soldering station, turn on our fume extractor. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply low melt solder onto the chip. I do not want to use the hot air station as you see me avoid in most of my videos. So we use low melt solder. Let's go ahead and remove the chip. We have a capacitor here. We have a resistor here. So what we have to do is be careful not to knock off any of those components. So let's start by applying some flux onto the pins. I can simply remove this chip by applying heat, but I do not want to do that. It's always safer to use low melt solder to lower the melting temperature of the pins. Okay, as you can see, the whole chip is getting loose from one end. Let's do the other end. Okay, and that chip came right off. We did not have to use hot air. We just simply removed the chip by using low melt solder. Right now what I have to do is just apply a little heat on the board. Heat is going to transfer throughout this area and we're going to desolder the chip like so. Okay, so the area is like no. That's where the chip is going to go. What we have to do is we have to prep the pads, apply some solder onto the pads. We want to make the pads ready to accept the chip. Let's go ahead and program the chip. Before we do so, let's clean up the chip so we can put it in the programmer. Okay, so the chip is ready to be programmed. Let's clean it a bit so we do not have any flux on it. I do not want to put flux in the programmer. Now we're going to get our programmer right here. So we have to align pin number 1 with the top left of the adapter here. Okay, and the chip is in place. Before we can read from the chip, we have to tell the program what chip we are using. So what we have to do is look for that chip 25L640-6E. Okay, select, and now let's go ahead and read. The programmer is able to see the chip, and it's currently reading from the chip, and you see the orange light flashing, which means that the programmer is reading the chip. Reading has finished. What I want to do now is save a backup copy of the firmware that's on the chip now, just in case. That's a backup copy. So what I'm going to do now is open a clean copy of the firmware, and I have it right over here. Open. Now that it's open right here, I'm going to flash it onto the chip. And we do this by pressing on the program key and program. So the chip is being programmed now. Alright, so the chip programming is complete. A new firmware has been flashed on to that BIOS chip or EFI chip. That's it, it's done. What we're gonna do now is solder that chip back onto the board. And for this, we're gonna use hot air. Let's wait until the board cools down a bit. The joints looks very good. Just for the sake of testing, we're gonna do this, and everything is super solid. We actually have more solder than we need, but that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Very good, that's it. Now we're not going to be able to test this board because the customer only sent the logic board, but there's a 99.99% chance that it's going to work. So any flux that's left on the board will actually get stuck on the dry wipe here. This is a lint-free dry wipe. And everything is going to be like new. Hey man, how are you?
Good, good. I'm trying to remember which one. The Asus motherboard with the wasn't turning on.
So that's it. We programmed the chip, we removed the old firmware, and we flashed it with a new firmware that doesn't have a password. We solder the chip back on and everything's good. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to test this board because customers send the board only and not the whole iMac, but everything should be good. We're going to pack this and send it back to the customer. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already done so, leave a comment if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.